Hey, how's it going, everybody? Scott Spreitzer here. He's Amal Shaw. We are DocSports.com's Against the Spread. We're going to tackle 7 games, 4 in college, 3 in the NFL for this upcoming week of action on the gridiron, and I can't wait to jump into it. We're going to give you a best bet at the end of the show and also tell you about what we've got going for this week in football and in daily sports for that matter. NBA is underway. So Amal Shaw and I will talk about that at the end of the show with those best bets. Before we jump into some Friday night college football, that banner at the top of your screen, if you're new to this, it is what it says. Get a free $60 account. You can then use the free $60 on any of Amal's daily packages or any of mine. All you got to do is click on the link below the video, get yourself set up if you're not yet a member, and you give DocSports.com a trial run. I can't think of a better way to take care of a trial run than that in the business, and I'm talking business wide. So give it a chance if you want. And again, you just log on that link at the bottom of your screen. Let's talk some Friday night football. Get right to it. I'm All Shaw. We got Boise State here in Las Vegas, Allegiant Stadium, laying a field goal, total 65 at UNLV. Highest ranked conference champions, as everybody knows, gets a bye in the 12-team playoffs. So Boise, they're ranked 17th right now. UNLV, as far as I'm concerned, is a legitimate top 25 team, yet they're still unranked. They were ranked for 1 week. They lose in overtime, a game they could have won and maybe should have won against Syracuse, certainly had their chances, but they lose in overtime to Syracuse, who's only got 1 defeat, and yet they can't crack back in to the top 25. They're getting a field goal at home here. I remember last year being at the Boise UNLV game towards the end of the season, and Boise basically had their way and won 44-20. How do you see this game going?
I think it's going to be a lot tighter. Scott, to be honest, I think this is a tough game to call. This is one where I will probably not play pregame, maybe if you get a larger number on either side in the in-game opportunity to take it. I think there's a lot of compelling arguments to be made for Boise in this one with Ashton Jeanty, in my opinion, right now, either 1A or 1B in terms of the Heisman candidacy with Cam Ward. On the flip side, this UNLV team has been far better since Slook has been removed from the equation. I think they're a dangerous football team. They lose to Syracuse and then they became an afterthought. Well, now with the win on Friday night, they're going to be back in the top 25. Scott, I'll be honest, I think this is probably one of the 5 best games of the weekend on paper to watch. I think this is probably one of the 5 toughest games to handicap in terms of picking a side for me. I just can't really get with it in this one because Jeanty is a big play guy for Boise, but that offense has been a little bit inconsistent when he's not hitting the home run. On the flip side, this UNLV team can score with almost anybody in college football. Can Boise get enough stops defensively, and can they keep pace offensively? Those are the big question marks for me. I'm not sure. So I'm going to straddle the fence here and stay away from this one.
Yeah, I don't want you to force anything. Nobody does. So
Yeah.
certainly, if you think it's a good pass, do so. Neither team does a ton through the air. Boise's a little bit better in the passing department, but again, they both love to run the ball. Both these teams. However, the defenses have pretty good numbers against the run.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody can stop Ashton Jeanty. I mean, the guy's averaging basically 10 yards per carry. It's crazy. Put up like a $190 against the Oregon Ducks in Eugene earlier this season. Then they lost that game by 3 points. I don't think the Ducks were playing at the level they are now. Both defenses are bad against the pass. That total's sitting at 65. It almost feels kind of square to play over, but I like that for the sake of the show. I think this game goes over the total. If you watched UNLV in a couple of wins this year, their offense has been basically unstoppable. And especially, as you mentioned, since Haj Malik Williams took over at quarterback when Sluka left, because they could throw the ball now. And with Sluka, they couldn't. There was no surprises. But anyway, having said that, there are times when I've seen UNLV build a decent lead and then all of a sudden give up points to the opponent like they did last week against Oregon State. Real nice win at Corvallis. They came in with a winning record, and UNLV puts up a bunch of points and gets the victory. But I think you're going to see these teams trading points, and 65 looks like an over to me. Notre Dame and Navy doing battle at MetLife Stadium. Interesting game, obviously, going into it with Notre Dame laying 13 here, total 51.5. I mean, Navy still got a shot at a 12-team playoff. It's almost like if I was just a fan of rooting against some of what college football has done, but by the way, I do like the expanded playoffs, I'd be rooting for Navy here, and then Navy and Army to, end up in the championship game in the AAC, and whoever wins that game loses the very next week in the regularly scheduled Army-Navy game, and they all get knocked out of the playoffs. Now, that's the mean Scott speaking, but as far as the nice Scott, I think this is going to be a tough situation for Navy. If you look at the power ratings going into last week's games, for instance, Notre Dame was a good 19 to 20 points better than Navy on a neutral field, the power ratings. And so here you're laying 13 on a neutral field. It almost feels a little squarish, but it almost feels like, you got a lot of cushion there between power ratings and where that line actually sits.
Couldn't agree with you more, Scott. I look at this matchup as a complete mismatch. The problem with the service academies is when you step up in class, when you're not playing the Memphis or some of those types of teams, and Memphis is a good football team offensively, but defensively they've got deficiencies. When you step up a level and you start playing opponents that really have the skill, the guys that are 3, 4, and 5-star athletes, potential NFL players, that becomes a real challenge. Navy's got a solid offensive line, offensive scheme, obviously. But to me, I think this is where the rubber meets the road. Remember last year, Notre Dame beat them 42-3. I just think the talent is too great. The athleticism takes over. Notre Dame doesn't have margin for error. And what's going to bolster their resume is who would have thought before the season started they're getting a ranked Navy team. This is a good opportunity for the Irish. I like them to cover here, Scott. MetLife Stadium, so no home field advantage for either side. It still should be primarily 75-80% Irish fans in the New York, New Jersey area there. So I like Notre Dame. I think the number below 14 is a really good play on. If you have an opportunity to get this before 14, do so. Obviously, if you like the other side, I would say wait if you like Navy here. But for me, it's the Golden Domers.
Yeah, I mean, I had Navy against Memphis, and Navy put up 570 on as far as total yardage, but they gave up almost 660, and they gave up almost 7 yards per play. And Memphis ran 95 plays in that game, and so Navy can pass better than they have in the past, but they're still 125th in passing yards per game, and I think that talent level will make a difference here for the Irish. To the SEC, it's LSU at Texas A&M. I'm all Texas A&M laying 2.5, total 53.5. I have these teams basically even on a neutral field. I'm all maybe an ever so slight lean to LSU, 6-1 with that win over Ole Miss. Looks pretty good. And they got over that in a hurry to whip Arkansas on the road, which I admired because you come off a big win and you're still able to go on the road and take care of business against a gamey type of team when you talk about Arkansas. And right now, if you had LSU taking on USC on a neutral field, I'd bet LSU and even throw your money on it. What do you think about this game?
Well, look, I can appreciate the affinity you have for LSU right now, and justifiably so. I'm just not there. I think this team got fortunate in the win against Ole Miss. They have two fourth-down conversions, 3rd and 10. They hit the touchdown. And for some reason, I guess Lane Kiffin's playbook only consists of 4 verticals. But to me, when I look at this matchup, I think A&M defensively is solid. Connor Wegman's done a nice job for this team offensively. They did struggle a little bit defensively against Mississippi State in that particular matchup down in Stark Vegas last weekend. But I thought LSU was the benefactor of a dumb penalty by South Carolina on the road to be able to win that game. There was a 90-plus yard touchdown return, was called back for a personal foul penalty during the play against the quarterback. That hurt them. I thought USC and them were pretty much level at that point in time when they played. They did a great job of dominating Arkansas, but even realistically, the Razorbacks are down 6, have the football, and a great play by LSU defensively gets Taylor Green on a pickoff, and they start the drive at the 1, and they score a touchdown, and they end up pulling away. But for me, I look at this matchup, and I sit here and I say, down in Kyle Field, the only thing that stands out is these teams have matched up 9 times. This is going to be the 9th time, 8 times previously when both teams are ranked. LSU's 8-0 in those matchups. So I don't know if you look at the past or if that applies for anybody, but just something to consider. For me, I got to go with Gig'em here. I like the Aggies.
I think it comes down to how the Aggies play when it comes to, I guess, intermediate and down the field passing. They're 52nd in passing success rate allowed. And I looked at, like Graham Mertz against the Aggies, the Florida quarterback, and he was able to find success. So I really do think you make great points. I think this is going to come down to Newsmeyer, who's one of the better quarterbacks in passes that are in the air for more than 10 yards, how they do on those passes. If they can take advantage of maybe some leaks in A&M's defense, then I think LSU wins. If A&M, rears up and all of a sudden they're able to slow those kind of passes down, then obviously I think that they would win this game. I really think it comes down to those passes that are in the air of more than 10 yards and how A&M is able to defend it. Illinois at Oregon as we head to the Big Ten. The Oregon Ducks leading 21.5 over the undefeated Illini, total 54.5. It's funny, Amal, because one of the things that I talk about when someone asks me on a radio show, what would you do if you're just getting into the handicapping slash sports betting business and you want to be more than just doing this for entertainment purposes as a bettor? And I tell them, do you work a 40 hour a week full-time job? And they're like, yeah, okay. And sometimes more. And I'm like, all right, well, you don't have the good fortune of some of us who spend 60 hours a week on this stuff. And that's our job. That's what we do. We're looking for places to try to take advantage of value and before the market reacts and all that kind of stuff. So what I tell them is learn how to make numbers, lines, the week in advance. So for this week's lines, I made my lines last Wednesday, a week ago, for this upcoming week's lines. And that keeps you from being, I'm not telling you anything new, but for people who are watching or new to this, it keeps from being like sucked in too much by a performance, whether positive or negative, that are way off the averages for a team. And you stay away from a lot of public thought when it comes to that, when it comes to sports betting by doing that. So I've just made a long story about before last week's games. Illinois was power rated outside the top 10 in the Big Ten, despite being undefeated. They were like the 11th best team on most people's power ratings. They were close to a touchdown underdog at home to Michigan. They got outgained by 50 yards or so against the Wolverines, ended up winning that game because of Michigan's turnovers. And if you look at what this team has done, they have had an issue where they've been able to take advantage of other teams shooting themselves in the foot. That's Illinois, how Illinois has been undefeated. They don't make mistakes. Yeah. Should have lost to Kansas, could have and maybe should have lost to Nebraska. The Huskers had their chances. Yeah. They allowed 530 yards in an overtime win over Purdue. Can they catch Oregon, in that mindset? I saw a write-up on this earlier this week, and I thought it was an interesting analysis that Oregon doesn't have to win by 60 during the course of the regular season to be in the playoffs because it's now a 12-team playoff. So the motivation there for Lanning to win 63-10 when he can win 33-17 isn't what it would have been in years past. I think it's an interesting argument. I don't know if it factors into this, but I'm having a hard time finding a reason really to plunk down my money on the Illini.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point with Dan Lanning. You look at the Michigan State game. They didn't play aggressively in the second half. You look at the game against UCLA, they get out to a big lead in the first half. I think Dan Lanning, and I love his approach, and it's great for bettors, is, hey, we're going to get up, do our work in the first half. We're going to get a comfortable lead, and we're basically going to sit on the ball. We're not worried about the point spread. We're not worried about winning pretty. At the end of the day, all we got to do is win the Big Ten title, and we're going to be the number 1 seed or number 2 seed. So I love his approach, and I think it helps bettors because now you have a situation. I can appreciate your arguments against the Illini, but for me, the counter to that would be, we know Dan Lanning's not looking to run it up. And I said to myself, can the Illini get to 14 to 17 points? If you believe they can, I think then they've got a chance to be able to cover the number against Oregon.
Yeah, and that's my big caveat on laying these points. I think power rating wise, obviously, I think they're a 3-touchdown favorite going into this game. The books do their job. But again, it's, does Oregon need to win big? They don't. Just go out there and win by 14. And you're fine, or win by 1, actually, and it's not going to hurt them. NFL for Sunday's card, we're going to start with the Bears and the Commanders from the nation's capital, Chicago laying 2.5, and this one 43. I'm going to kick this one to you, but I'm going to start off by saying early Wednesday, and folks, we're recording this late Wednesday afternoon, but early Wednesday, I did hear that Jaden Daniels was held out of practice on Wednesday for the Commanders, and they said they were kind of trending towards Marcus Mariota starting this game for Washington. And we saw him play well. He goes 18 for 23. How much of this has been Jaden Daniels and how much of this has been the play calling and the offensive game plan going to each game for Washington, Amal?
Yeah, I think that has to be a factor. You look at it, not that Marcus Mariota is Jaden Daniels right now, but remember, he was the number 2 overall pick, won a Heisman Trophy. He's done a lot of great things, so he's had success. The big thing for me is, when I look at this right now, this matchup, the Bears defensively are arguably the best unit on the field of the 4 units. So I think that's why you're seeing the number up at 3. But I have to tell you, Scott, I think Marcus Mariota is one of those guys that maybe the fans criticize and don't necessarily like the way his career has panned out since he was at Oregon. What is he, 10th year in the league now? But right. I think he's the kind of guy teams will rally around and want to see do well. He just seems like a guy, from everything I've heard, is a good teammate. I like the Commanders here at home +3. I don't think the Bears are justified in being a 3-point road favorite. And one other thing I'll add to it, Scott, the Chicago team is 4-2. You talk about perpetrating a fraud. I mean, look at some of the wins that they've had so far over the Jaguars, the Panthers, the Rams were in disarray at that point in time, and the
Mhm.
Tennessee Titans. I mean, Will Levis gifted them that game.
Yep.
Scott, I don't know about you, but I haven't received a Christmas gift that good since what Will Levis gave the Bears.
No, and I agree with you. I hear a lot of people talking Chicago this week, and you kind of hit the points I was going to make about the schedule that Chicago has faced. And I know Caleb Williams is playing a better brand of football, but he hasn't faced anybody quite yet. So we're in agreement there on this game. And again, they're getting 2.5. I don't know. Maybe if they finally announce that Daniels is definitely out, you might see a 3 pop up, or maybe 3.5. I don't know if it'll get to 3.5, but 3 I would think pops up this weekend if they finally announce that Daniels is out rather than being questionable going into Sunday. Eagles are at Cincinnati. The Bengals laying 2.5 in this one, the total 48. Hurts comes out and gives Nick Sirianni a little pat on the back, little confidence boost, saying that he's all in with Nick Sirianni. We heard that a couple of days ago, but I'm not so sure. Listen, last week was a great spot to back the Eagles, and they just hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, and it destroys his ex-teammates. He had a huge game. Hurts only had to throw the ball 14 times. He threw the ball for 114. I know if you go to the box, you'll see less than that, but it was a situation where the sack yardage started to add up. At 114 yards on 14 passes, that's all he had to do. That O-line dismantled the Giants in the trenches. There's no doubt about that. Since he won their last 2, they beat Cleveland, they beat the Giants, and they're only 15 points from a 7-0 mark, talking about the Bengals. I love the way Burrow's playing. 14 touchdowns, only 2 picks, and they're better than that 3-4 record, as you can tell by the losses that they suffered being so close. And then Philly comes in 4-2, but they have one quality winnable as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned, and that was
I
Week 1
agree.
against Green Bay. They lose to Tampa Bay 33-16. I mean, Tampa Bay is up and down. I don't trust Baker Mayfield too often. I go 5-2 last week. One of my plays was Tampa, so I got burned. I've been calling Baker Mayfield Baker the Spaz Mayfield since he was at OU, and he just gets. He started out well, as we saw, and he ends up playing well the first quarter. Then he gets real excited. He's button heads on the sideline, and he falls apart, which is Baker Mayfield when he gets excited. Now that's another game, obviously, but I'm just talking about the fact that Philly got blasted by Tampa Bay. I can't back him here.
I look. I'm not going to play this game, but I like the Bengals, and the reason why I'm not going to back them, I'm not as high on Cincinnati as you might be. I watched that game against the Browns. They get a kickoff return for a touchdown to start it off. That offense was stuck in neutral the entire first half. I just don't see this team clicking right now. Burrow and Chase always seem like a combination that's going to be available and successful, going back to their LSU days. But for me right now, this Cincinnati defense got a lot of question marks offensively. You mentioned the Giants game. They get that lucky cover with the Chase Brown touchdown late in the fourth quarter. It was struggle street there against New York as well. I tell you, if somebody's a teaser player, Scott, I stopped playing teasers because the pricing, I think it's gotten out of whack. But if you're a teaser player, I think Philly's a team I would tease up. But the less than the field goal at home to me tells me Cincinnati all day here. I thought this number should be 3. I've just criticized Cincinnati, but Scott laid out perfectly exact reasoning why I don't think Philadelphia should only be under a field goal dog here. Makes no sense. They played well in Brazil. I don't think they play well in the United States.
Schedule their games overseas or in
Yeah,
South America.
exactly.
They might be undefeated. Cowboys at Niners on Sunday night, and the Niners laying about 4.5 in this one. Total around 46.5. It's funny, if we would have cut this video on Monday, I would have
Yeah.
been ripping Debo Samuel apart for okay. And I'm gonna explain what's happened since, and everybody probably knows. But I saw a guy come out, warm up. I think he was in for a couple of plays, and then spend the rest of the day on the bench. And they said he was under the weather. Now, listen, if you're under the weather and you got a flu bug or a cold, and you stand on the sidelines for an entire game in a big game against a team like KC, I was ready to rip the guy apart. Say, come on, man, you're abandoning your teammates. Well, then we find out he ends up in the hospital with pneumonia. So, you know what? I back off that statement completely. I mean, the guy had pneumonia and had fluid in his lungs. So I'm glad we didn't cut this on Monday, is basically what I'm trying to say, because I would have ripped him apart before the news came out. Having said that, he's listed as questionable. We don't know, young, healthy guy, how he's going to react if he does get out of the hospital. He can get out there and practice a little bit, how effective he'll be coming off a bout with pneumonia. But they're so banged up right now. They have a healthy Trent Williams up front at left tackle, but you're talking about not only Samuel, you're talking about Ayuk, who's out now with the broken ankle or whatever it was. And then you got a situation, Amal, where and I'm trying to back off of San Francisco because I like them here. But the bottom line is, I look at that defense, and if you check their metrics, it's a much better defense in the first two quarters than in the final two quarters of games this year. They fall off the table a bit with their defensive metrics in the third and fourth quarter. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Scott, I'm not going to give an official play on this game because I have one myself and I'll have it on Docs this weekend. But I'll tell you, you bring up a couple of good points. Debo Samuel, him not being in the lineup has a huge impact. We know CMC being out, what it does for this team, because Debo could pick up the slack rushing the football. And of course, Mason's done a nice job for them. They lose Ayuk. He's out for the year. I believe the ACL, MCL situation.
That's right. ACL,
Ricky Pearsall is a first round pick. He's got talent. If you didn't watch him play at Arizona State and then Florida, this kid can play. But how impactful can he be right now? Dallas defensively has been anemic. And I'll tell you one other thing that's deceptive. The Dallas Cowboys are dead last in rushing the football, a million miles behind everybody else. But they're number one in throwing the football. Here's the problem, Scott. They've had to throw against the Saints when they were down by 100 points early, against the Ravens when they got down in the first half. This is a team that has been trailing consistently. Stats are a little bit ringing hollow here and misleading. So to me, it's a concern for Dallas. How healthy are they? Their defense has just been getting absolutely crushed by everybody. But then on the flip side, Brock Purdy, very good quarterback. I have him as a top 10 quarterback right now. But I'll tell you what, when the chips were down, he couldn't deliver. There were some opportunities in that game against the Chiefs. He failed in those. And I think if you want to win the big game, you got to be able to deliver in those spots. I'm not saying one regular season game in week 6, week 7 means anything big picture wise, but that's what you like to see when you have a huge revenge spot like they did last week.
And this might make my personal card too, by the way, over at Doc Sports. I'm going to decide after I see if the line moves a certain way or not before I jump in. So, and we're doing this on Wednesday. And folks, all of our plays, all the guys over at DocSports.com, including them all and myself, we do release our NFL and college football plays for the upcoming weekend, Thursday through Monday. Every Thursday afternoon, you can jump on board. It's at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific when those plays are posted. So got about 24 hours to decide if I'm definitely jumping in on this game or not. I'm all, listen, we both had nice weeks last week. I know you had a nice week last week. Tell us a little bit about that. What's going on for Amal Shah at DocSports.com this week?
Yeah, I really was fortunate in terms of the games were really one-sided for me. I had the Kansas Jayhawks against Houston, and then of course the Miami Hurricanes over Louisville. I just don't think the Cardinal. There's no D in Louisville, so we saw it reflected against Cam Ward and company. And then Buffalo spots Tennessee a 10-point lead, comes back and wins that game comfortably. And then of course the Seahawks against the Atlanta Falcons, who can't stop a nosebleed defensively against the pass. So looking to kind of build upon that momentum of 4-0 week last week, but. You know, Scott, I think as we get later in the season, there's some better and better plays shaking out. And I also think some of the lines, sometimes you see them a little bit skewed. There's a great college play guy coming up, big play this weekend, and really looking forward to it. One team that continuously is disrespected.
Cool. You know, we are on the same play in Kansas. That was my top play last week in college football. And I thought that was just a great spot. You're talking about a week off, and you've lost a bunch of games you could have won if you could have got out of your own way, and you've got that staff led by Lance Leipold, and I'm a big Leipold fan, despite the record going into last week. So that was my top play too, and they end up just taking care of Houston without much trouble, 42-14. Went 5-2 last week, so since September 19th, now 24-10 in college and pro football combined. The college record, I had a bad start, August 31st, the first kind of main week of college football. I lost. But since then, since September 1st, now 73% against the spread in college football. It's been a real nice run after the tough start in August. So we'll look to keep that going. Probably going to have 7 plays. That's what I'm looking at right now. I might add 1 or 2, but it looks like 7 plays for me. 7-star in Saturday's college football and a 6-star in the NFL. You can check out all of our plays, including the daily plays, NBA, NHL, baseball playoffs starting on Friday. RIP Fernando, man, that was a sad, sad loss that we heard on Tuesday night. But can't wait for that to start. So all of our plays, including the daily packages, available each and every day at DocSports.com exclusively. And again, just to remind everybody, get that free $60 account if you're not yet a member, and then you can apply those free $60 to any of our daily packages over at DocSports.com. Best bet them all before we call it a day.
Oh, we talked about it earlier. It's the Golden Domers playing in the Meadowlands. I like Notre Dame here. I think it's a great spot for them, laying 13. Just too much talent, too much. You know, Scott, real quick, You remember when Hawaii played Georgia in a bowl game with Colt Brennan and June Jones and those guys years ago? I think it was the Sugar Bowl. And you see these low of 7.5, and then they get beat by what looks like half 100 or something. Sometimes you get these teams like Navy, and everybody's going to cheer for a service academy when they're not playing their team. But the reality of it is they're a good football team. Now you're playing a team it's a very good football team who's got the skill to match up with anything that you do. And I think it's going to be a challenge here for the midshipmen.
Yeah, I'm with you. We don't talk about who we're on before we do these shows, but we're both
Yeah.
going to be on the best bet for this show with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Again, that's a lot of cushion, as I mentioned earlier, between that power rating and where the line sits as we speak. And I think if you do like Notre Dame and want to jump on board with the Alumni, then you might want to do it before it gets to 14. There's nothing harmful in waiting if you like Navy, waiting for that number to potentially
Yeah.
move up to the full 2 touchdowns. But Amal and I are best bets on the show. Notre Dame minus the points over Navy. Again, check out all of our plays each and every day over at DocSports.com, the free videos, all that good stuff. For Amal, I'm Scott. Everybody, you know what to do. Let's put them in the win column. We'll talk to you next week.